Can you imagine a poor, gaunt woman holding her 7-year-old son as they huddle to sleep in an old car on a freezing, rainy night in the Pacific Northwest, accidentally bringing down an entire powerful criminal empire with just one truthful sentence? Horrifyingly, simply because she dared to expose the fake jade pendant of an arrogant fiancé in front of the entire luxurious coffee shop, the barista Hannah Brooks was hunted to the brink, beaten in a dark alley, threatened with having her only son taken away, and caught in the crosshairs of the two most notorious Mafia families in Seattle. But even more tragic, the most powerful man in the city, the one who coldly ended his engagement with a single sentence, suddenly steps in to protect her, despite the fact that she is the biological daughter of his archenemy, whom he has hated for 20 years. Can a love at first sight between a woman who once endured hunger to the point of sleeping in her car and a ruthless, cold-hearted kingpin change the fate of both families? Or will it all lead to a bloody ending? Stay with me until the end of this story, because what's about to happen will keep you glued to the screen. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. All right, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. It was a rainy October evening in 2025, and the air inside Emerald Brew, the most exclusive specialty coffee roastery in Bellevue, Washington, felt thick with money and quiet judgment. Crystal pendant lights glowed over marble counters, the scent of single-origin Ethiopian beans mingling with the faint perfume of the wealthy patrons who treated the place like their private club. Everyone knew the rules here: speak softly, tip generously, and never, ever make a scene. Hannah Brooks stood behind the espresso bar in her faded black apron, her hands moving with the practiced grace of someone who had pulled thousands of shots just to keep the lights on in a crumbling studio apartment. At 32, she looked older, cheeks hollow from too many skipped meals, dark circles etched beneath tired blue eyes, her light brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail because she hadn't had time to wash it in days. She was raising her 7-year-old son alone, scraping together rent from double shifts and whatever tips the kinder customers left in the jar. Some nights, she and the boy slept in her ancient Civic when the heat got shut off. Poverty clung to her like damp Pacific Northwest rain, cold, relentless, impossible to shake. Tonight, the cafe was hosting its usual crowd of tech millionaires and East Side socialites. At a corner table sat Chloe Kim, the beautiful, sharp-tongued fiancée of Ethan Caldwell, the fair-skinned, powerfully built man who quietly controlled Seattle's ports, construction unions, and much of the underground cash that flowed through the city. Ethan was 38, wealthy beyond imagining, with piercing hazel eyes and a reputation for ruthless calm. He sat watching Chloe with the detached patience of a man who had long ago learned to hide every feeling behind an unbreakable mask. Chloe had been complaining for 20 minutes. The milk was half a degree too cool. The latte art rosetta was lopsided. The bean origin didn't match what she'd read on some influencer's post. Finally, she pushed the porcelain cup away with manicured fingers and fixed her cold gaze on Hannah. "This is unacceptable," Chloe announced loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear. "Do you even know what a proper third-wave pour looks like? Or are you just another barista who thinks foam makes her an artist?" Hannah's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice soft, polite, the way years of customer service and sheer survival had trained her to do. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. Let me remake it for you right away, no charge. Chloe laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. No charge? As if I'd pay for this anyway. She lifted the delicate jade bouquet pendant that hung at her throat, an ornate piece she constantly bragged was a priceless Joseon dynasty heirloom passed down through her family. You see this? My ancestors wore this while people like you were still scrubbing floors in Seoul shacks. Some things can't be faked with hard work. The cafe went quiet, phones discreetly angled. Hannah felt the familiar twist of humiliation in her empty stomach, the kind that came from knowing everyone was watching her be diminished. But something in her, the same stubborn spark that kept her going when the pantry held nothing but saltines, refused to let the lie stand. With trembling fingers, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small jeweler's loop she used to check bean defects. "May I?" she asked quietly. Chloe rolled her eyes but thrust the pendant forward, confident. Hannah leaned in, shining the cafe's bright task light onto the stone. The room watched in stunned silence as she examined it for a long, careful moment. This setting style, the micro-pave halo around the center jade, wasn't developed until the late 1990s, Hannah said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. And under strong light, authentic Joseon jade doesn't fluoresce this dull green. Modern lab-created stones do. She clicked off the light and stepped back. It's a beautiful replica, ma'am. Probably worth a few $1,000s, but it's not an heirloom. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Chloe's face flushed crimson. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Chloe stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. "You insolent little," she hissed, raising her hand as if to strike. The entire room froze. Ethan Caldwell rose slowly from his seat. His presence alone commanded silence. He looked at Chloe with an expression that held no anger, only cold, final disappointment. "We're done," he said quietly. "The engagement is over." Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Tears of rage welled in her eyes as she grabbed her designer bag and stormed out, vowing in a shrill voice that the pathetic barista would regret ever opening her mouth. Hannah stood numb behind the counter, dizziness washing over her. The applause that should have come never did. Instead, the wealthy patrons simply returned to their conversations, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She felt suddenly faint, legs unsteady, vision swimming. All she could think was that she had just made an enemy of the most dangerous woman in Bellevue, and tomorrow she would still have to figure out how to feed her son. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the plate glass windows like a warning. Hannah had no idea that the real storm was only beginning, and that the man whose life she had just upended without meaning to would soon become the only thing standing between her and total ruin. The rain had turned merciless by the time Hannah finished closing Emerald Brew that October night in 2025. The marble counters gleamed under the dimmed lights, but her reflection in the polished espresso machine looked like a ghost, thin shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from another week of eating only what her 7-year-old son left on his plate. She counted the tips, $43.72, enough for a half tank of gas and a loaf of bread, but not enough to stop the eviction notice taped to her apartment door that morning. She pulled on her threadbare rain jacket, zipper broken, sleeves too short, and stepped into the alley behind the cafe. The wind whipped cold needles of rain against her face. Her old Civic waited under a flickering street lamp, backseat piled with the blankets she and her boy had been using on the nights the landlord cut the heat again. She was so tired her bones ached, so hungry her stomach cramped. But she kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering how far she had fallen. She never saw them coming. 3 men emerged from the shadows near the dumpster. Chloe Kim's cousin Minjun and 2 of his enforcers from the park syndicate. They wore dark hoodies and the kind of confident smirks that came from knowing no one would call the police in this part of Bellevue after hours. "You're the barista who humiliated my cousin tonight," Minjun said, voice low and amused. He stepped closer, rain dripping from his expensive jacket. "Chloe wants an apology. A real one. On your knees." Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. She backed up until her spine hit the cold brick wall. Her voice came out small, trembling. I'm sorry if I offended her. I only told the truth about the pendant. Please, I have a son waiting at home." Minjun laughed softly. "That's the point. Chloe thinks someone needs to learn respect, starting with you." One of the men grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her thin flesh. Pain shot through her shoulder. She tried to pull away, but hunger and exhaustion had left her weak. The world tilted, dizziness, numbness spreading through her limbs like ice. She thought of her boy asleep in the car 2 blocks away, waiting for her to come back with something, anything, to eat. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. Then headlights cut through the darkness. A black Range Rover pulled into the alley with deliberate slowness, blocking the men's escape. The driver's door opened, and Ethan Caldwell stepped out alone. No bodyguards visible, just him, tall, broad-shouldered, fair-skinned face unreadable beneath the street lamp glow. His tailored wool coat probably cost more than Hannah made in a year. Rain beaded on the fabric, but didn't soak through. Minjun released her arm instantly. The 2 enforcers shifted nervously. "Mr. Caldwell," Minjun said, forcing a smile. "This is just a private matter, family business." Ethan didn't speak at first. His hazel eyes moved over the scene. Hannah pressed against the wall, shaking, soaked, malnourished frame swallowed by the oversized jacket. Something dark and violent flickered across his usually controlled expression. Guilt, sharp and unexpected, twisted in his chest like a blade. He had ended his engagement to Chloe hours earlier without a second thought. Chloe was beautiful, connected, ambitious, everything a man in his position was supposed to want. But watching Hannah expose the lie with quiet, exhausted dignity had cracked something inside him he'd long believed unbreakable. For years, he had buried every soft feeling under layers of power and calculation. His younger sister's death 5 years ago, leukemia that ravaged her before any donor could be found, had taught him that caring was a luxury he couldn't afford. Remorse had become a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of his soul, reminding him that money and fear could buy almost everything except a second chance. Yet here was this woman, starving, terrified, protecting her child with nothing but stubborn truth, and something in Ethan's carefully armored heart shattered. "This isn't your territory, Minjun," Ethan said at last, voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And she's under my protection now." Minjun's smile faltered. "With respect, Mr. Caldwell, Chloe is no longer my concern." Ethan took a single step forward. Rain slid down his face, but he didn't blink. "Leave, while you still can." The 2 enforcers exchanged glances and backed away immediately. Minjun hesitated, pride warring with survival instinct. Finally, he spat on the ground and retreated, muttering threats under his breath about consequences and family honor. The alley fell silent except for the drumming rain. Hannah remained pressed against the wall, breath coming in shallow gasps. Her legs felt like water. She stared at Ethan, confusion, fear, and something dangerously close to hope warring inside her chest. No one had ever stood between her and harm before. Not since her husband died in a warehouse accident 4 years ago, leaving her with medical debt and a newborn. Ethan turned to her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. Up close, she could see the faint lines of sleeplessness around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Wealth radiated from him, the subtle scent of expensive cologne cutting through the rain, the watch that gleamed even in the dim light. But his expression held something raw. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again, dizziness overwhelming her. I don't understand. Why would you? Because what happened in there tonight wasn't right, he said. The words felt inadequate. Inside, turmoil raged. He had spent years convincing himself emotion was weakness, yet the sight of her, so thin, so utterly alone, ignited a fierce, possessive protectiveness he hadn't felt since holding his sister's hand in that sterile hospital room. Guilt crashed over him in waves, for the life he led, for the luxury he took for granted, while women like Hannah starved in his city. He removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders without asking. The wool was warm from his body, heavy with the scent of sandalwood and rain. It swallowed her frame entirely. Hannah clutched the lapels, tears spilling anew. The coat alone could have paid her rent for months. I can't accept this. You already have, he said gently. Come, I'll take you to your son. She stared at him, suspicion and wonder colliding. How do you know I have a son? I listened, he replied simply, when you begged them not to hurt you because he was waiting. Another wave of dizziness hit her. She swayed. Ethan caught her elbow, steady, strong, careful. The contact sent an electric jolt through both of them. For Hannah, it was the first kind touch in longer than she could remember. For Ethan, it was the first time in years he had touched someone without calculating advantage. The remorse inside him deepened into something violent and consuming. How many nights had he spent in his Medina mansion overlooking Lake Washington, while women like her slept in cars? How many private jets had he taken while children went hungry in his shadow? He guided her to the Range Rover, opening the passenger door himself. Inside, the leather seats were heated, the air warm and dry. Classical music played softly. It felt like stepping into another world. Hannah sank into the seat, exhaustion and shock numbing her limbs. She should have been terrified of this man everyone whispered about, this fair-skinned king of Seattle's shadows. But instead, an overwhelming, confusing sense of safety washed over her. Tears fell silently as the car pulled away from the alley. Ethan drove in silence for several blocks, hands tight on the wheel. His heart pounded with a feeling he barely recognized, the first, fierce, burning surge of love. Not gentle or gradual, but sudden and absolute, like a match struck in absolute darkness. He wanted to protect her, feed her, give her everything she had been denied. The thought terrified him as much as it consumed him. Where is he? Ethan asked softly. The community center parking lot on 132nd, she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. We stay in the car sometimes. When the apartment heat, she couldn't finish. Sobs shook her thin frame. Ethan's jaw clenched. Remorse and rage twisted together until he could barely breathe. He reached across the console and took her cold hand in his, careful, as if she might break. Not anymore, he said, voice rough with emotion. Never again. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Inside the warm car, two broken souls, one forged in poverty, one forged in power, began a journey neither could have foreseen. And in Ethan Caldwell's chest, a heart long frozen began to burn with a love so intense it threatened to consume them both. The Range Rover cut smoothly through the rain-slicked streets of Bellevue, headlights carving tunnels of light in the October darkness of 2025. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic swipe of the wipers and Hannah's quiet, uneven breathing. She sat huddled in Ethan Caldwell's coat, the luxurious wool swallowing her thin frame like a blanket from another lifetime. The heated seat warmed her bones for the first time in weeks, but the comfort felt wrong, dangerous, like accepting charity from a storm that could turn on her at any moment. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, knuckles white. His mind was a battlefield. The image of Hannah pressed against that alley wall, small, shaking, starving, had seared itself into his soul. Remorse gnawed deeper than ever before. For years, he had convinced himself that his wealth was earned, his power justified. He donated to hospitals, funded scholarships, told himself it balanced the shadows. But seeing her tonight stripped away the lie. How many Hannahs had gone hungry while he ordered $1,000 bottles of wine without glancing at the label? The guilt was violent, tearing at the walls he had built around his heart since his sister's death. And beneath the remorse burned something new, something fierce and terrifying. Love. Sudden, absolute, consuming. He wanted to shield her from every cold night she had ever endured. The feeling frightened him more than any rival ever had. Hannah stole glances at him, confusion and fear swirling in her chest. This man, whispered about in hushed tones as the untouchable king of Seattle's underworld, had risked confrontation for her. Why? She clutched the coat tighter, shame flooding her. The fabric smelled of sandalwood and safety, things she had forgotten existed. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's half sandwich. Dizziness threatened again. She pressed her forehead to the cool window, trying to steady herself. "We're here," Ethan said softly, pulling into the dimly lit community center parking lot. Her ancient Civic sat alone under a broken lamp, windows fogged from the rain. Inside, curled beneath a pile of thrift store blankets in the back seat, slept her son. 7 years old, small for his age, cheeks still round with childhood, but eyes already carrying shadows no child should know. Hannah's hand flew to the door handle. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, for everything." Her voice was timid, polite, the way poverty had taught her to speak to anyone with power. "Ethan," he corrected gently, "and I'm not leaving you here." She froze, heart pounding. We're fine. We've managed before." He turned to face her fully, hazel eyes intense in the dashboard glow. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Before she could protest, headlights flared behind them. 2 black SUVs screeched into the lot, blocking the exit. Doors opened. Minjun Kim stepped out with 4 men, more enforcers from the park syndicate, faces hard under the rain. Hannah gasped, terror flooding her veins. Her son stirred in the car, murmuring in his sleep. She reached instinctively for the door, but Ethan's hand closed gently over hers. "Stay inside," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. "Lock the doors." He stepped out into the rain, closing the door behind him. The cold wind whipped his shirt against his broad frame, but he stood tall, unafraid. Minjun approached with false confidence. "Caldwell, didn't expect to see you playing knight tonight. Chloe's family wants a word with the barista. Hand her over, and we all go home dry." Ethan's expression didn't change, but inside, rage and protectiveness collided like thunder. "She's under my protection. Tell Daniel Park the debt is settled. Walk away." Minjun laughed, gesturing to his men. They fanned out, surrounding Ethan's rover. One tapped on Hannah's window with a flashlight, leering. She shrank back, clutching the coat, heart hammering so hard she felt faint. Her son woke fully now, sitting up with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama?" he whispered. "It's okay, baby," she lied, voice trembling. "Just stay down." Outside, tension crackled. Minjun stepped closer. "You're on the wrong side of this, Caldwell. The parks have numbers. You're alone." Ethan smiled coldly. "Am I?" Headlights flooded the lot from every direction. 4 more vehicles, Ethan's men, roared in, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Doors opened. 8 armed figures emerged, positioning themselves with practiced precision. No weapons drawn, but the message was clear. Minjun's bravado faltered. Rain streamed down his face. Ethan took a slow step forward. "This ends tonight. You don't touch her. You don't come near her son. You don't even drive past this block again. Tell Daniel Park that if he wants war, he'll get it. But it won't be over a woman who's suffered enough. The standoff stretched, rain drumming on metal roofs. Hannah watched through the window, breath fogging the glass. Fear and awe warred inside her. This powerful man defending her, a nobody, against an entire syndicate. Tears blurred her vision. No one had ever fought for her before. Minjun spat on the ground, pride wounded. "This isn't over," he snarled, signaling retreat. His men backed toward their SUVs, casting dark glances. Ethan didn't move until the taillights vanished into the night. He returned to the Rover, soaked but steady. Hannah unlocked the door with shaking fingers. Her son stared at him with huge eyes. Ethan knelt to the boy's level, voice gentle. "Hey, buddy, I'm Ethan. Your mom and I are friends. How about we get you both somewhere warm tonight?" The child looked at Hannah. She nodded, tears falling. "It's okay, sweetheart." Ethan lifted the boy carefully, blankets and all, into his arms. The child weighed almost nothing. Remorse hit Ethan like a physical blow. This boy, hungry, cold, sleeping in a car, while he lived in a lakefront mansion with rooms he never used. He carried the child to the back seat of the Rover, buckling him safely. Hannah followed, legs unsteady. As she climbed in, dizziness overwhelmed her again. The world tilted. She stumbled. Ethan caught her instantly, strong arms steadying her slight frame. For a moment they stood in the rain, her soaked and shivering, him solid and warm. Their eyes met. Something electric passed between them. Inside Ethan, the surge of love intensified, passionate, burning, unstoppable. He wanted to erase every hardship she had endured. The conflict tore at him. A man who ruled through fear, now desperate to protect with tenderness. Hannah felt it too, the shift, safety, care, things she had stopped believing in. Shock and confusion numbed her, but beneath it stirred a fragile, overwhelming gratitude that felt dangerously like hope. He helped her into the passenger seat, then drove into the night, toward his Medina estate, toward a future neither could yet imagine. Behind them, the empty Civic sat abandoned under the broken lamp, a relic of the life Hannah had endured alone. Ahead, through sheets of rain, lights gleamed on Lake Washington, a mansion waiting, warm and vast. And in the quiet of the car, with her sleeping son in the back and Ethan's coat still around her shoulders, Hannah Brooks allowed herself one silent, disbelieving tear. For the first time in years, the rain felt like it might be washing something away, instead of adding another weight to carry. The gates to Ethan Caldwell's Medina estate swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway lined with ancient evergreens that whispered in the relentless October rain of 2025. The mansion emerged like something from a dream, floor-to-ceiling glass reflecting the storm, warm lights glowing from within, a fortress of quiet luxury perched on the shores of Lake Washington. Hannah pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass. She had driven past these gates once, years ago, when she was still married and hopeful, marveling at how the other half lived. Now she was inside, wrapped in the coat of the man who owned it all, her sleeping son cradled in the back seat. Ethan parked beneath the porte-cochere, where the rain no longer reached. Two discreet security men appeared with umbrellas, but he waved them away. He carried the boy himself, light as a bird in his strong arms, while guiding Hannah with a gentle hand at her back. She stumbled on the marble steps, dizziness returning in waves. Hunger, exhaustion, shock, they all collided inside her until the world blurred at the edges. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly with cedar and fresh flowers. A grand foyer soared 2 stories high, a crystal chandelier casting soft prisms across polished hardwood. Hannah stopped dead, feeling smaller than ever. Her worn sneakers left faint wet prints on the floor. Shame burned her cheeks. This was a home for people who never worried about eviction notices or empty refrigerators. A kind-faced housekeeper appeared, but Ethan dismissed her with a quiet word. He carried the boy up a sweeping staircase to a guest suite that overlooked the lake. Hannah followed numbly, legs trembling. The room was larger than her entire apartment. Plush carpet, a king-size bed piled with down pillows, an ensuite bathroom gleaming with marble. Ethan laid the child down gently, tucking a cashmere blanket around him. The boy stirred, murmured, "Mama," then drifted back to sleep. Hannah stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Tears welled again. This is too much. We can't stay here." Ethan turned to her, eyes dark with emotion. "You're staying, both of you, until it's safe." She shook her head, voice soft and timid. "Safe from what? Chloe? I'll find another job. We always manage." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "It's not just Chloe anymore." His voice was low, strained. Inside, turmoil raged. He had already made calls on the drive, quiet inquiries into her background, the kind only a man with his resources could make. The answers had come faster than expected, and they had shattered him. Hannah Brooks wasn't her real name. She was Grace Park, daughter of Daniel Park, the ruthless head of the Korean-American syndicate that had been his family's bitter rival for 2 decades. She had vanished 4 years ago, days before a forced marriage to a brutal ally twice her age. Daniel had told the underworld she was dead, kidnapped by enemies. In truth, she had run, changed her name, cut all ties to protect her unborn child from the life that would have destroyed them both. Ethan had stared at the encrypted file on his phone, heart pounding. The woman he had fallen for in a single devastating night was the daughter of his greatest enemy. The conflict inside him was violent, rage at Daniel for driving her to such desperation, remorse for the years of war between their families, and beneath it all, the burning love that refused to dim. Loving her meant betrayal of everything he had built. Protecting her meant war. He looked at her now, thin, malnourished, eyes haunted by years of cold nights and empty cupboards, and the love won. "Grace," he said quietly. She froze, color drained from her face. How do you know that name?" He took a slow step forward. "I know who your father is. I know why you ran." Terror flashed across her features. She backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. Dizziness overwhelmed her. The room spun. "Please, don't send me back. I'll disappear again. Just let us go. He'll kill my son if he finds us." The plea tore at Ethan's heart like claws. He closed the distance gently, hands raised. "I would never, never." His voice cracked. "You're safe here, both of you." She slid down the wall, legs giving out, sobs shaking her frail body. Years of fear, loneliness, hunger, all of it poured out. Ethan knelt before her, helpless against her pain. He gathered her carefully into his arms, cradling her as she wept against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. Remorse consumed him. He had profited from the same world that had starved her. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, "for everything you've suffered, for the part my world played in it." She clung to him, confusion and desperate gratitude warring inside her. No one had ever held her like this, not since her husband died. The warmth, the strength, it was overwhelming. Shock numbed her limbs, but beneath it stirred something new. Trust, fragile and terrifying. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. Security reported movement. Park Syndicate vehicles circling the perimeter roads, probing for weakness. Ethan's jaw tightened. He carried Grace to the bed beside her son, tucking her in despite her weak protests. She fell asleep instantly, exhaustion claiming her at last. He stood watching them for a long moment, mother and child, finally safe under his roof. The love inside him burned hotter, fierce and protective. He would burn the city down before letting anyone touch them. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At dawn, as fog rolled off the lake, 3 black sedans pulled up to the estate gates. Minjin Kim stepped out with 6 men, demanding to speak to Ethan. Security held them at the perimeter, but Ethan went out himself, alone, coatless, in the chill morning air. Minjun's smirk was gone. Daniel Park wants his daughter returned, immediately. Ethan stood motionless, hands in pockets. She's not going anywhere. You're harboring stolen property, Caldwell. Blood debt. You know the rules. I know the rules better than you, Ethan replied coldly. And I know what kind of father drives his daughter to sleep in a car with her child rather than stay under his roof. Minjun's face darkened. His men shifted, tense. Behind the gates, hidden cameras recorded everything: insurance, leverage. Ethan's own reinforcements waited out of sight. Last chance, Minjun said. Hand her over, or we take her. Ethan smiled without warmth. Try. The standoff stretched. Rain began again, soft and steady. Minjun weighed the odds, Ethan's reputation, the unseen security, and finally backed down, retreating with muttered threats. Ethan returned inside, heart pounding with adrenaline and fear, not for himself, but for the woman and child upstairs. He went to the guest suite. Grace was awake, sitting on the bed's edge, holding her son as he ate breakfast from a tray the housekeeper had brought. Fresh fruit, warm pancakes, things they hadn't tasted in months. She looked up as Ethan entered, eyes wide with fresh anxiety. Was that about me? He nodded, crossing to her. It won't happen again. How can you promise that? Her voice was soft, pleading. My father, he never stops. Ethan knelt before her again, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Because I won't let him near you, ever. The intensity in his eyes, the absolute certainty, shook her to her core. Tears welled again. Someone was fighting for her, protecting her. The psychological shock was profound. From years of desperate poverty to this sudden, overwhelming safety. It felt unreal, like a dream she feared waking from. Her son reached out shyly, offering Ethan a strawberry. Ethan took it gravely, smiling at the boy. The simple gesture broke something inside Grace. Sobs rose again, not of fear this time, but of relief so deep it hurt. Ethan pulled her close, holding mother and child together. His own heart tore violently between past hatreds and this new, burning love. He would rewrite every rule, end every feud, if it meant keeping them safe. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the world clean. Inside the mansion, 3 lives began to intertwine, poor and powerful, broken and healing, in a bond forged in one extraordinary night of courage and compassion. And in Ethan Caldwell's chest, the frozen places thawed completely, filled now with a love so passionate it threatened to consume everything he had ever been. Morning light filtered through the towering windows of the Medina mansion, turning Lake Washington into a sheet of hammered silver. Grace stood at the glass in one of Ethan's borrowed white shirts, sleeves rolled a dozen times, hem brushing her thighs. She looked impossibly small against the vastness of the room, the house, the life that had swallowed her whole overnight. Her son was still asleep in the next room, belly full for the first time in weeks, cheeks flushed with real warmth instead of fever from cold. She could not stop trembling. Not from chill, though the memories of wind slicing through the cracked windows of her Civic still lived in her bones, but from the sheer disorientation of waking up safe. Every breath felt borrowed. Every heartbeat carried the terror that this would vanish the moment she believed in it. Ethan watched her from the doorway, coffee cup forgotten in his hand. He had not slept. How could he? The woman 10 feet away was Grace Park, daughter of the man who had ordered the murder of Ethan's own father 23 years ago. Blood debt, ancient hatred, a war that had claimed dozens on both sides. And yet the sight of her barefoot on his heated marble floors, thin shoulders hunched as though expecting a blow, tore him apart more violently than any bullet ever had. He set the cup down and crossed the room slowly, afraid she might shatter. "Grace," he said, voice rough from the night silence. She turned, eyes wide and wary. "You shouldn't use that name. If he hears..." "He already knows you're here," Ethan cut in gently. Minjin told him everything. Daniel is moving people into position as we speak. He thinks he's coming to collect his runaway daughter. Horror flooded her face. She swayed, hand flying to the window frame for support. "Then we have to leave, now, before he..." "No." Ethan caught her shoulders, steadying her. His hands trembled too. He felt it and hated it. "You're not running anymore. Not with your son. Not ever again." Grace stared up at him, confusion and terror swirling. "You don't understand what he is, what he'll do. He'll burn this house down with both of us inside just to prove he can." Ethan's grip tightened, not painfully, but with absolute conviction. "Let him try." The words hung between them, heavy as thunder. Downstairs, his phone lit up with messages, sightings of Park Syndicate cars on every road leading to Medina. They were closing the net. Ethan felt the old war drums in his blood, the ones that had beaten since he was 17 and took his first life to avenge his father. But now something fiercer drowned them out, the need to protect this woman and her child. It was irrational, impossible, suicidal. Every rule he had lived by screamed betrayal. Loving the enemy's daughter meant treason to his own people, yet the love was already there, full-blown and burning, tearing his chest open with every heartbeat. He released her shoulders and stepped back, voice low. "I'm going to end this, but I need something only you can give me." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, waiting. The borrowed shirt smelled of his cologne and safety, and it made her want to weep. "You know where he keeps his real records," Ethan continued. "Not the cooked books the feds see, the real ones. The Dojang seal that stamps every dirty deal for the last 30 years. The ledger that lists every judge, every cop, every shipment. If we take that, we take him. We end the war without another grave." Her breath caught. The vault beneath Hanuk flame. He never changed the biometrics because he never believed I'd betray him. A bitter laugh escaped her. Arrogance is the one thing he and I still share. Ethan's eyes softened with something close to awe. This fragile, starving woman held the key to destroying an empire, and she was offering it to him. The enormity of her trust cracked the last of his defenses. "Then we do it together," he said. "You and me." Grace searched his face, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you risk everything for us? You don't even know me." He stepped close again, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Because the moment you stood behind that counter last night, half dead from hunger, still refusing to let a liar win, you became the bravest person I've ever met. Because your little boy deserves to grow up without looking over his shoulder. And because..." His voice dropped to a whisper that shook with emotion. "Because I looked at you, and something in me that's been dead for years came back to life. I don't know how to be soft, Grace, but for you, I will learn." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She had spent so long being invisible, disposable, that hearing herself seen, truly seen, felt like dying and being reborn in the same breath. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. Another park vehicle, bolder this time, rolling slowly past the gates. Ethan's jaw hardened. He took her hand, cold, trembling, and pressed it over his heart. "Say yes. Let me fight for you." The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. Then Grace nodded, the smallest movement, but it changed the world. "Yes," she whispered. In that moment, the alliance was forged. Not between crime families, but between two broken souls who had finally found something worth bleeding for. Ethan pulled her gently against him, arms wrapping around her as if she were made of glass and fire at once. She buried her face in his chest and let the sobs come. He held her through them, rocking slightly, his own eyes stinging with tears he had not shed since childhood. Later, when the house was quiet again, and her son played in the sunlit library with toys he had only ever seen in store windows, Ethan stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. His lieutenants waited for orders. War or peace hung in the balance. He thought of his father's grave, of his sister's empty hospital bed, of every drop of blood spilled in the name of pride. Then he looked back through the glass doors at Grace, kneeling on the carpet, laughing softly as her son showed her a wooden train. And he made his choice. He would tear down hell itself before he let anyone take this from them. The unlikely alliance was no longer unlikely. It was inevitable. The days that followed blurred into something almost dreamlike for Grace. The Medina mansion felt like another planet, silent, warm, endlessly generous. She and her son were given rooms with lake views, closets filled with clothes that still had tags, meals prepared 3 times a day without her ever lifting a finger. Her boy, who had spent most of his short life learning to be quiet so the landlord wouldn't notice them, now ran barefoot across heated floors, laughing at the sound his footsteps made. Each giggle felt like a small miracle to Grace, and each one stabbed her with guilt. She could not stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every time she passed a mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Cheeks slowly filling out, dark circles fading, hair washed and brushed instead of knotted from days of neglect. The body that had learned to survive on 1 meal a day now rebelled against abundance. Her stomach cramped from too much food. Her sleep was restless from the softness of the mattress. Poverty had carved deep grooves into her. Comfort felt like betrayal. Ethan watched her struggle from a careful distance. He gave her space, never crowding, never demanding. Yet every glance she caught from him carried the same burning intensity that had first appeared in the rain-soaked alley. It frightened her as much as it drew her. No one had ever looked at her that way, like she was something precious, something worth protecting at any cost. On the 5th morning, the dream cracked. Her son woke with a fever. At first, she thought it was just a cold, the kind they had both endured countless times in the damp car. But by noon, his temperature had climbed to 103 degrees, his little body shaking with chills. Grace sat on the edge of his bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, whispering every soothing word she knew. Panic clawed at her throat. She had no insurance, no savings, no way to pay for a doctor. In her old life, she would have wrapped him in every blanket they owned and prayed the fever broke before the hospital bills could bury them deeper. Ethan found them like that, Grace rocking her son, tears streaming silently down her face. He took one look at the boy's flushed cheeks and glassy eyes and acted without hesitation. Within 20 minutes, a pediatrician, discreetly paid, was in the room. Blood was drawn, tests ordered, medications delivered by private courier. Ethan stood in the doorway like a sentinel, arms crossed, watching the doctor work with the same focused intensity he brought to every crisis. When the doctor left, he closed the door quietly and knelt beside Grace. "He'll be all right," he said. "It's a bacterial infection, probably from the lungs. The antibiotics will start working soon." Grace nodded, numb. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the cloth. "I can't pay for any of this," she whispered. "I don't have—" "Stop." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "You don't pay for anything here. Ever." She looked up at him, eyes swimming with shame and gratitude and something darker, fear that this kindness was a debt she could never repay. Later that evening, while the boys slept under the watchful eye of a nurse Ethan had hired, Grace sat alone in the library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves rose around her. A fire crackled in the hearth. She had never been in a room so quiet, so warm, so safe. It terrified her. Ethan found her there, standing in front of the fire, arms wrapped around herself. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "You're thinking too hard," he said softly. She turned. Tears glittered on her lashes. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Accept help. Accept you." He took one careful step closer. "You don't have to accept anything. Just let me help." "Why?" The word broke from her like a confession. "Why me? I'm nobody. I have nothing to give you." Ethan's throat worked. He looked away for a moment, gathering words he had never spoken aloud. "When my sister was dying," he began quietly, "she needed a bone marrow transplant. We searched for months. No match in the family, no match in the registry. She was slipping away, and I couldn't do anything but watch." Grace went very still. "5 years ago," he continued, "an anonymous donor came forward. Perfect match. The transplant saved her life. She's alive because of a stranger who gave something they didn't have to give." He met Grace's eyes. "I never found out who it was. The registry protects donors. All I knew was that the donor was a woman in her late 20s living in Washington state." Grace's breath caught. She swayed. The room tilted. Ethan stepped forward, catching her elbows gently. "It was you, Grace. The medical records confirmed it this afternoon. You saved my sister. You gave her life when you could barely keep your own." The words landed like stones in deep water. Grace's knees buckled. Ethan guided her to the nearest chair, kneeling in front of her so their eyes were level. She stared at him, shock so profound it stole her voice. Memories flashed, driving 4 hours to the transplant center after a double shift, needles in both arms, the dizzy weakness that lasted weeks, all while her husband was still alive and they still had a tiny apartment. She had done it because she couldn't bear the thought of a child dying when she might be able to help. She had never told anyone. It was just something she did and then tried to forget. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it was your sister." Ethan's own eyes were wet. "You gave without asking for anything. You saved her. And now, by some impossible twist, you're here, in my house, in my arms. I've spent years trying to repay a debt I didn't even know how to find the person for. And all along, it was you." He reached up, brushing tears from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was reverent, trembling. Grace's heart cracked open. All the years of cold, of hunger, of being invisible. Suddenly, they felt like they had led to this moment, to being seen, to being needed. The love that had been simmering beneath her fear surged upward, fierce and terrifying. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. Their breaths mingled. Neither spoke for a long moment. "I don't know how to love someone like you," she whispered. "Someone who has everything." "I don't know how to love someone like you," he answered, voice raw. "Someone who has given everything and still thinks she's nothing." They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, while the fire crackled and the lake whispered against the shore. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in years, the night felt gentle. Inside, two hearts, long starved, began to beat in time. And somewhere in the silence between them, an alliance deeper than strategy took root. An alliance built not on power or revenge, but on a single, selfless act of kindness that had crossed their paths years before they ever met. The storm returned that October night in 2025, wind howling across Lake Washington like a warning. Inside the mansion, the study was lit only by the glow of a single desk lamp and the flickering fire. Maps, photographs, and encrypted files covered the mahogany table. Blueprints of Hanok Flame, surveillance stills of Daniel Park's guards, schedules of deliveries and shifts. Ethan stood over them, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw set in the hard line Grace had come to recognize as controlled fury. Grace sat across from him, wrapped in one of his cashmere sweaters that reached her knees. Her son slept upstairs under the nurse's watchful eye, fever finally broken, cheeks pink with health instead of sickness. Yet Grace could not relax. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, the cold, calculating man who had once locked her in her room for a week because she refused to smile at a prospective husband. The memories clawed at her, dragging her back to nights of hunger, of hiding bruises under long sleeves, of whispering to her unborn child that they would escape someday. She looked at Ethan now, fair-skinned, powerful, the man who could buy cities if he wished, and felt the familiar dizziness of disbelief. How had her life twisted into this? From sleeping in a car with cracked windows letting in the wind, to sitting in a study worth more than every paycheck she had ever earned combined. The contrast was cruel. It made her feel small, fraudulent, as though at any moment someone would realize she didn't belong and throw her back into the rain. Ethan sensed her gaze and looked up. His hazel eyes softened instantly. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another way." Grace shook her head. "There isn't another way. The vault is the only thing that will finish him. If we leave it, he'll rebuild. He always does." She leaned forward, pointing to the blueprint. "The service elevator here. Code is still my mother's birthday. He never changes anything that reminds him he once had a heart." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "The vault needs my retina and voice print. He kept them because he thought I'd come crawling back one day, grateful for his mercy." Ethan's fists clenched. The thought of Daniel Park believing his daughter would ever return to that cage ignited a rage so deep it frightened even him. Remorse followed immediately. Remorse for the world he had helped shape, where men like Daniel thrived while women like Grace starved. The love burning in his chest was no longer a quiet flame. It was a wildfire, consuming every old loyalty. He reached across the table and covered her cold hand with his warm one. "We do this on your terms. If you say stop, we stop." Grace turned her hand palm up, fingers curling around his. The simple contact grounded her. "My terms are simple. My son never knows that life, never wonders if there will be dinner, never sleeps in a car again." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both promise and prayer. "He won't." They worked through the night, voices low, heads bent close over the plans. Grace described the club's rhythms, the way security rotated at 11:30 when the kitchen staff took breaks, the blind spot in the camera by the walk-in freezer, the private booth where her father held court. Ethan listened, absorbing every detail, translating it into strategy. Between sentences, their eyes would meet, and the air would thicken with unspoken feeling. Suspicion had long since burned away. What remained was a trust so profound it scared them both. At 3 a.m, Ethan's phone vibrated. Security footage showed 2 Park Syndicate SUVs parked at the end of the private road, lights off, waiting. Ethan stood at the window, watching the distant glints of metal in the rain. Grace joined him, slipping her hand into his. "They're getting bolder," he said. "Let them come," she answered, voice steady for the first time in years. "We'll be ready." The plan took shape like a living thing. They would use Chloe's vanity, the one weakness Grace remembered from years of watching her father manipulate allies. A carefully planted rumor. The thief barista was fencing Chloe's stolen jade pendant at Hanok Flame on Saturday night. Chloe, furious and desperate to reclaim her pride, would storm the club with lawyers, private investigators, maybe even off-duty police she could buy. The chaos would pull security to the front, leaving the lower levels vulnerable. Grace would enter disguised, platinum wig, emerald dress, the kind of glamour she had only ever seen from the outside. Ethan would be at her side, tuxedo sharp, playing the indifferent escort. They would slip downstairs during the distraction, open the vault, retrieve the ledger and Dojang seal, and stream the evidence live to federal contacts Ethan had spent years cultivating. Simple on paper, impossible in reality. Yet as they stood shoulder to shoulder at the window, watching the rain sheet down the glass, neither doubted it would work. Not because the plan was perfect, but because they were doing it together. Dawn crept gray over the lake. Grace's son padded into the study, rubbing sleepy eyes, clutching a stuffed bear the housekeeper had found for him. He climbed into his mother's lap without a word. Ethan watched them, mother and child, safe, warm, loved, and felt his heart tear one final time between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. He knelt beside the chair, resting his head against Grace's knee. She threaded fingers through his hair, the gesture natural now. "We'll end it Saturday," he said against the soft fabric of her sweater. She nodded, pressing her cheek to her son's curls. "And then we start something new." Outside, the park vehicles finally pulled away, retreating for now. Inside, 3 lives intertwined more deeply than blood or war had ever managed. The strike was planned. The storm was coming. And in the quiet before it broke, Ethan Caldwell and Grace Park held each other in the half-light, hearts beating with the same fierce, impossible hope. Saturday night arrived like a blade drawn across the city. October rain had given way to a cold, clear sky, stars sharp above Seattle's International District. Hanok Flame glowed neon red and gold, its line of luxury cars stretching down the block. Inside, the air thrummed with bass, the scent of grilled short rib and expensive liquor, the laughter of people who had never known hunger. Grace stood in the mirrored dressing room of Ethan's mansion, staring at a stranger. The emerald silk gown hugged curves that had only begun to return after weeks of regular meals. Platinum blonde hair, courtesy of the finest wig in the city, fell in sleek waves to her shoulders. Makeup softened the hollows beneath her eyes, painted her lips a confident red. Diamond studs glittered at her ears, borrowed, insured for more than she used to earn in a year. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged in places like Hanok Flame. She felt like an imposter waiting to be exposed. Ethan appeared behind her in the mirror, tuxedo cut perfectly to his broad frame, fair skin striking against the black fabric. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, voice low and rough with emotion. Grace met his eyes in the glass. "I'm terrified." "I know." He turned her to face him. "But you are also the strongest person I have ever known. We do this together, one step at a time." She nodded, drawing strength from the steady warmth of his hands. The love between them had become a living thing, fierce, protective, almost painful in its intensity. It frightened her how completely she had come to rely on it, how one look from him could quiet the storm inside her chest. They left the mansion in a black limousine, Ethan's security trailing at a discreet distance. Grace's son stayed behind, safe with the nurse and a full security detail. As the city lights blurred past, Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. "What if Chloe doesn't come?" she whispered. Ethan's smile was grim. "She will." And she did. At 9:30 sharp, a crimson convertible screeched to the curb outside Hanok Flame. Chloe Kim emerged in a storm of flashbulbs and fury, flanked by 2 private investigators, a lawyer clutching papers, and 3 off-duty officers she had persuaded with promises of favors. Cameras from local gossip sites captured every moment as she stormed the velvet rope. "That thief is inside selling my family heirloom," Chloe shrieked, voice carrying over the music. "I demand you search the premises. Officer, do your duty." The bouncers hesitated. Daniel Park's men recognized Chloe's connections, but her performance was too loud, too public to ignore. Security radios crackled. Guards peeled away from the lower levels to contain the spectacle at the front doors. Exactly as planned. Ethan and Grace slipped in through the VIP side entrance, his arm possessively around her waist. No one questioned them. Ethan Caldwell's face opened doors that money alone could not. Inside, the club pulsed, red lanterns swaying, bodies moving under strobes, the elite of Seattle's Korean-American underworld laughing at tables laden with banchan and $1,000 bottles. Grace's heart hammered so hard she feared it would give her away. Every face felt familiar, every laugh a threat. She spotted her father's private booth on the upper balcony. Daniel Park holding court, silver hair gleaming, eyes cold as winter steel. Ethan felt her tense. He leaned close, lips brushing her ear. Breathe. I've got you. They moved through the crowd like smoke, descending the service stairs Grace had memorized as a teenager forced to play hostess. The noise faded behind them. Fluorescent lights buzzed in the concrete corridor below, kitchen clatter, the hiss of grills, staff rushing past with trays. Grace punched her mother's birthday into the service elevator pad. The doors closed with a soft thud. In the confined space, Ethan pulled her against him. You can still change your mind, he said. She looked up, eyes fierce despite the fear. No, this ends tonight. The elevator opened to the basement. 2 guards stood at the vault door, familiar faces from her childhood. They straightened at the sight of Ethan, uncertainty flickering. Mr. Caldwell, one began. Boss said no one down here tonight. Ethan's voice was calm steel. Stand aside. The guards exchanged glances. Ethan's reputation did the rest. They stepped back. Grace approached the vault, legs trembling. The scanner's red light swept her eye. Identity confirmed. Voice verification required. She leaned to the microphone, heart in her throat. Blood never betrays, she whispered, the old passphrase her father had forced her to memorize. Tumblers thudded. The door swung open. Inside, stacks of cash, weapons crates, and in the center, a leather-bound ledger and the ancient ivory dojang seal. Grace's hands shook as she lifted them. We have it, she breathed. Ethan's phone was already recording, streaming encrypted footage to federal servers. It's uploading. They turned to leave and froze. The elevator doors stood open. Minjin Kim waited there, flanked by 4 of Daniel's most loyal men. But something was wrong. Minjin's eyes burned not with duty, but with raw, personal hatred. You shouldn't have come back, Grace, he said. His gaze flicked to Ethan with venom. And you shouldn't have touched what wasn't yours, Caldwell. Ethan stepped in front of Grace instinctively. This ends now, Minjin. The evidence is already gone. Walk away. Minjin laughed, bitter and broken. Walk away? After you stole everything? Chloe was supposed to be mine, before you ended the engagement, before you paraded this traitor around like some prize. Grace's blood ran cold. She had known Minjin since childhood, always jealous, always watching from the shadows. He had wanted Chloe for years, seeing her as his path to power. You tipped Daniel early, Ethan said, realization dawning. You wanted us trapped down here. Minjin's smile was ugly. 2 birds, 1 stone. Daniel gets his disobedient daughter, I get rid of you. Chloe will finally see who really deserves her. He raised a hand. His men moved forward. Ethan shoved Grace behind him. The narrow corridor erupted into controlled chaos, shouts, bodies colliding, the sickening thud of fists meeting flesh. Ethan fought with lethal precision, protecting Grace without drawing blood that could not be explained, but there were too many. A blow caught him across the temple. He staggered. Pain exploded white hot. Another fist drove into his ribs. He went down hard, blood filling his mouth. Grace screamed his name. Terror and rage collided inside her. She lunged for the alarm panel she remembered from childhood, pulled it with all her strength. Sirens wailed upstairs. Red emergency lights flashed. Minjun cursed, realizing the distraction above had become real pandemonium. Chloe's scene plus the alarm. Police would be coming now, real ones. Ethan surged up, tackling Minjun. They crashed into the wall. Grace grabbed the ledger tighter and ran for the service tunnel she had told Ethan about, an old smuggling route her father thought no one remembered. Ethan broke free, blood streaming from his brow, and followed her. Behind them, Minjun shouted orders, footsteps pounding. They burst into the cold night air through a rusted side door, rain starting again in icy sheets. Ethan's limousine waited exactly where planned, driver ready. They dove inside. "Go," Ethan barked. Tires spun on wet pavement as they sped away. In the rear view, Grace saw Minjun emerge, face twisted with rage, firing a warning shot into the air that echoed like thunder. Ethan slumped against the seat, pressing a hand to his bleeding head. Grace tore strips from her silk gown, pressing them to the wound with shaking hands. "You're hurt," she sobbed. "Because of me." He caught her wrist, eyes blazing through the pain. "I'd take 100 worse for you." She leaned into him, tears mixing with rain on their faces. The ledger lay between them, cold proof of every crime her father had committed. Behind them, Hanok Flame's lights strobed red and blue, real authorities arriving now, drawn by the chaos Minjun's betrayal had unleashed too early. The heist had begun perfectly. It had nearly ended in disaster. And in the back of the speeding car, holding each other as if the world might tear them apart, Ethan and Grace felt their love burn brighter than any danger. Because betrayal had shown them the truth, nothing, not blood, not war, not even death, could take them from each other now. The limousine tore through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, tires hissing on wet asphalt as it raced toward the safe house Ethan kept hidden in the hills above the city. October's chill seeped through the cracked window, but inside the car, the air was thick with blood and fear. Ethan leaned heavily against the leather seat, one hand pressed to the gash above his eyebrow, the other clutching Grace's trembling fingers, as if letting go might make her vanish. Grace knelt on the floorboard in her ruined emerald gown, silk torn and stained, pressing strips of fabric against his wound with shaking hands. Tears blurred her vision. Every jolt of the car sent fresh pain through him, and each small grimace on his face felt like a knife in her own heart. "This is my fault," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're hurt because of me." Ethan opened his eyes, hazel depth fierce even through the haze of pain. "Look at me." When she did, he repeated it softer. "This is not your fault. None of it." She shook her head, sobs rising. "If I hadn't run, if I just stayed and married that monster, none of this." "Stop." His voice carried the same quiet authority that commanded rooms full of dangerous men, but now it was laced with something raw and desperate. "You did what you had to do to survive, to protect your son. You were brave when no one else was." Grace's hands stilled. Memories flooded her. Nights in the car with wind whistling through broken seals, her boy coughing in the cold while she counted quarters for gas, days skipping meals so he could have cereal, the humiliation of food bank lines and eviction notices. All of it crashed over her now, made unbearably sharp by the contrast of this moment, the heated leather seats, the bulletproof glass, the man bleeding for her sake. Ethan watched the storm break across her face and felt his own heart tear wider. The remorse that had haunted him for years, over his sister's illness, over the lives his world had ruined, now focused on this one woman. He had everything: homes, jets, influence that bent laws and men alike. Yet he had never felt poorer than watching her believe she was unworthy of the safety he could give. The driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've got 2 tails, park vehicles, closing fast." Ethan straightened despite the pain, pulling Grace up beside him. "Hold on." The limousine surged forward, weaving through traffic. Behind them, headlights flared, 2 black SUVs gaining ground. Grace clutched the seat, dizziness returning as adrenaline spiked. Her son's face flashed in her mind, safe at the mansion, but for how long if this ended badly? One SUV pulled alongside, window rolling down. A man leaned out, shouting threats, gesturing angrily. Ethan's driver swerved, forcing them back. The chase twisted through downtown, horns blaring, lights streaking in the rain. At a red light, the second SUV rammed their rear bumper. The impact jolted them forward. Grace cried out. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, shielding her body with his. "Enough," he growled into his phone. "Intercept now." Moments later, 3 of Ethan's own vehicles appeared from side streets, boxing the pursuers. Tires screeched. The park SUVs were forced to brake hard, surrounded in a tense standoff under the traffic lights. No shots fired, just cold stares and shouted warnings across the rain. Ethan's men held the line until the light changed, and city traffic forced the pursuers to peel away, outmaneuvered. The limousine sped on, leaving the confrontation behind. They reached the safe house, a modern fortress of glass and concrete hidden among evergreens. Security swept the grounds as Ethan helped Grace inside. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing out the world. In the dimly lit living room, Ethan sank onto a leather sofa, finally allowing pain to show. Grace fetched the medical kit with trembling efficiency. Years of patching her own cuts and her son's scrapes in gas station bathrooms had taught her the basics. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, hands gentle despite her tears. "You need stitches." "I've had worse," he said, but his voice was rough. She threaded the needle, breath hitching. As she worked, the silence grew heavy, filled with everything unsaid. When the last stitch was tied, she sat back on her heels, hands stained red. "I thought I was going to lose you." Ethan caught her wrists, pulling her up until she straddled his lap, careful of his injuries. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears. "You won't," he said fiercely. "Not tonight, not ever." The words broke something open between them. Grace leaned forward, forehead resting against his. Their breaths mingled, ragged, desperate. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Not just for me, for you, for what this means." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I know." The confession spilled from him then, raw and unstoppable. "I've spent my life believing love was weakness, that caring made you vulnerable. I watched my sister fight for every breath and couldn't save her. I built walls nothing could touch." His voice cracked. "Then you walked into that cafe, half-starved, exhausted, still refusing to bow, and those walls crumbled. I fell in love with you the moment you spoke truth to power with nothing but your voice." Grace's breath caught. Tears fell onto his shirt. "I fought it," he continued, words tumbling now. "Told myself it was duty, protection, anything but this. But it's not. It's love. So deep it terrifies me. I would burn everything I've built to keep you safe. I would walk away from it all if that's what you needed." She pulled back just enough to search his eyes. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm broken, Ethan. I have nothing. You're everything," he interrupted, voice fierce. "You gave life to my sister without knowing her name. You raised a child alone through hell. You stood in that vault tonight and faced the monster who raised you. You are the strongest person I've ever known." Grace's sob broke free. She cupped his face, thumbs tracing the line of dried blood. "I was dead inside before you, just surviving. You gave me hope again. You gave my son a future. I love you so much it hurts." The words hung between them, simple, absolute. Ethan pulled her down into a kiss that was desperate, healing, consuming. It was not gentle. It was the collision of two people who had survived too much alone. Hands clutched, breaths mingled, tears mixed with rain still drying on their skin. In that kiss was every cold night she had endured, every regret he carried, every promise they were making without words. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, breathing hard, the world outside ceased to exist. "I love you," he whispered against her lips, completely, irrevocably. "And I love you," she answered, voice trembling with wonder. "More than I thought possible." They held each other in the quiet aftermath, hearts pounding in unison. The ledger lay forgotten on the table, evidence that would end an empire. But in that moment, nothing mattered except the truth they had finally spoken. The desperate escape had stripped away the last barriers. What remained was love, raw, passionate, unbreakable. And in the stillness that followed the storm, Ethan Caldwell and Grace Park began to heal the wounds the world had given them, one heartbeat at a time. The safe house perched on the darkened hillside like a silent witness, its windows glowing softly against the black October sky of 2025. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the metallic tang of blood. Ethan sat on the edge of the sofa, shirt unbuttoned, fresh bandages wrapped around his ribs and head. The pain was a dull roar, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside his chest. Grace moved around him with quiet efficiency, bringing water, pain medication, a warm cloth for his hands. Her torn gown had been replaced with one of his soft cotton shirts and sweatpants cinched tight at the waist. She looked small, fragile, yet her eyes held a new steel forged in the night's fire. Every time she brushed against him, the contact sent sparks through both of them, reminders that they were alive, together, unbroken. The ledger lay on the coffee table between them, its leather cover stained with rain and blood. The live stream had finished uploading hours ago. Federal servers now held irrefutable proof of decades of crimes, briberies, extortion, every name Daniel Park had ever bought or broken. The Dojang seal sat beside it, ivory gleaming like an accusation. Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly, updates from his men, news alerts, calls from lawyers. Hanok Flame had been raided, dozens arrested. Daniel Park and Minjun Kim cornered in the basement vault, surrounded by agents in Kevlar. Grace stood at the window, watching distant city lights flicker red and blue. Her reflection stared back, pale, exhausted, but no longer the hollow-eyed woman who had once counted pennies for milk. The transformation felt unreal, like waking from a nightmare into someone else's life. "They have him," she whispered. Ethan joined her, standing close enough that his warmth chased the chill from her skin. "Yes." She turned to him, eyes searching. "What happens now?" He took her hands, careful of the small cuts on her palms from the night's chaos. "We end it." The final confrontation came at dawn. Federal agents allowed Ethan and Grace escorted access to the raided club, special consideration for the man whose evidence had made the case ironclad. The once vibrant Hanok Flame now stood cordoned off, floodlights harsh against the morning mist. Agents moved like shadows through the wreckage, shattered glass, overturned tables, the lingering scent of smoke and fear. They were led to the basement. Daniel Park sat cuffed to a metal chair in the cold vault room, silver hair disheveled, suit rumpled. Minjun lay on a stretcher nearby, shoulder bandaged, face pale with pain and defeat. Agents stood guard, faces impassive. Daniel looked up as Grace entered. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps regret, but it hardened instantly. "My disobedient daughter," he said, voice laced with bitterness. "Bringing a Caldwell into my house. You destroyed everything." Grace stopped a few feet away, Ethan at her side like a shield. Her heart pounded, old fears rising, but she did not flinch. "You destroyed us first," she said quietly. "You tried to sell me. You would have sold my son. I chose life over your cage. Daniel's laugh was hollow. Life? Sleeping in cars? Starving? This is what you chose? The words struck like blows. Grace swayed. Memories flooded, wind howling through cracked windows, her boy's small body shivering against hers, the humiliation of begging for day-old bread at closing bakeries. Tears welled, but she lifted her chin. Yes, she said, because it was honest, because it was free. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. Inside him, rage and sorrow collided. This man had driven the woman he loved to such desperation. Yet seeing Daniel now, defeated, aged, stripped of power, stirred an unexpected pity. Remorse gnawed deeper. How many fathers like this had his own world created? Minjun stirred on the stretcher. You think you've won, Caldwell? Chloe will never forgive you. And Grace, she's always been weak. She'll drag you down. Ethan's voice was ice. The only weak one here is you, betraying your own side for a woman who never wanted you. Agents shifted, ready to intervene. Daniel looked at Grace one last time. You are no daughter of mine. The words should have broken her. Instead, they freed her. You're right, Grace said, voice steady. I'm the woman who survived you. The woman who found someone who loves her without chains. She turned away, ledger in hand, and walked toward the stairs. Ethan followed, pausing only to face Daniel one final time. The room fell silent. Agents watched, sensing the weight of history. Ethan's heart tore violently. Vengeance screamed for blood. Daniel had ordered his father's death, fueled decades of war. Mercy felt like betrayal. But he looked at Grace waiting on the stairs, thin shoulders straight, eyes bright with tears but unafraid, and he saw his sister's face in the hospital, pleading for life, not revenge. He saw the future he wanted, mornings with Grace's laughter, her son's footsteps running through halls that once echoed only with strategy and solitude. He stepped closer to Daniel. I could end you here, Ethan said quietly. Make sure you never see daylight again. It's what the old rules demand. Daniel met his gaze, defiance flickering. But I'm done with old rules. Ethan's voice carried the full weight of his torment. You will live. You will be exiled to South Korea with enough money for a modest apartment and basic care. No empire, no power. Just the rest of your life to think about the daughter you lost and the grandson you'll never know. Daniel's face crumpled, shock, humiliation, perhaps the first glimmer of regret. Ethan turned away. That's mercy you never showed anyone. Consider it a gift from the woman you called weak. He climbed the stairs to Grace. She took his hand without a word. Together they walked into the pale morning light. Outside, news vans gathered, reporters shouting questions. Ethan's security held them back. Federal agents nodded respectfully as the couple passed, the man who had delivered justice without a single unnecessary death. In the waiting car, Grace leaned against Ethan, exhaustion finally claiming her. It's over, she whispered. He kissed her temple, arms wrapping around her possessively, tenderly. It's just beginning. The final confrontation had not ended in vengeance. It had ended in mercy, a mercy born of love too deep to allow hatred to win. And as the car pulled away from the ruins of Hannock Flame, Ethan Caldwell held the woman who had saved his soul, knowing he would spend the rest of his life making sure she and her son never knew cold or hunger again. The war was over. A new life, built on forgiveness, on love fierce enough to rewrite every rule, had begun. Months passed quietly after that October night in 2025, yet the transformation felt like a lifetime compressed into heartbeats. The Medina mansion, once a fortress of solitude and strategy, had become a home. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows onto hardwood floors, where a 7-year-old boy now ran barefoot, chasing sunlight patterns instead of shadows. Laughter echoed where silence used to reign. Flowers bloomed in window boxes, simple daisies Grace had planted herself, refusing to let the gardeners do it. She wanted to feel the earth under her nails again, to remember she was still alive. Grace stood in the kitchen one crisp morning, apron tied over a soft sweater, stirring oatmeal on a stove that cost more than her old apartment's entire rent for a decade. Her hands no longer shook from hunger. Her cheeks had filled out, her eyes brighter, yet sometimes she still caught herself counting the spoons, as if scarcity might return in the night. Poverty had carved deep tracks in her soul. Comfort still felt borrowed, fragile. Ethan watched her from the doorway, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from the shower. He had stepped away from the shadows of his former life, not completely, not yet, but enough. Legitimate businesses now carried the weight that crime once had. Ports ran cleaner, unions breathed easier. The empire he had inherited was being quietly dismantled, piece by honest piece. The man who once ruled through fear now ruled through choice, and every choice circled back to her. He crossed the room silently, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and pressed his lips to the curve of her neck. "Good morning," he murmured against her skin. She leaned into him, eyes closing at the warmth. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." His voice dropped, honest. "Kept thinking about how close I came to losing you." Grace turned in his arms, hands framing his face. "You didn't lose me. You found me." Their kiss was slow, deep, the kind that carried every unspoken promise from the night they had almost died together. When they parted, foreheads touching, Grace whispered, "I still can't believe this is real." Ethan's throat worked. "Sometimes I wake up afraid it's a dream. Then I see you and our boy, and I remember I'm allowed to be happy." Downstairs, the boy, now calling Ethan Dad without hesitation, ate breakfast at the island, feet swinging. He had gained weight, grown 2 inches, and his laughter had become the soundtrack of their days. Grace watched him with tears in her eyes, remembering nights when she had held him close in a freezing car, whispering apologies for not having enough blankets, enough food, enough anything. Ethan knelt beside the boy's chair. "Ready for school?" The child nodded, oatmeal on his chin. "Can we take the blue car today?" Ethan laughed softly. "Only if you promise to tell your teacher about the new book you're reading." Grace watched them, her son, once pale and too quiet, now bright-eyed and safe, the man who had once terrified half the city, now tying shoelaces with gentle hands. The contrast still stole her breath. She had gone from counting change for gas to living in a house with more rooms than she could name, from sleeping in fear to waking in arms that held her like she was the most precious thing on earth. Love had not erased the past. It had simply grown larger than the pain. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove them to the rebuilt flower shop on the south side, the one Elena Martinez had once owned, now run by a young family who had received anonymous restitution from the old protection rackets. Grace had insisted on visiting. She needed to see what mercy looked like in the real world. They parked across the street. Through the window, a woman arranged roses, smiling at a customer. Children played in the small garden out back, flowers blooming where once only weeds had grown. Grace's eyes filled. "You did this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "We did this. You showed me what mercy costs and what it's worth." She turned to him, tears shining. "I was so afraid you'd choose revenge, that you'd become him." "I almost did," he admitted, voice raw. "But every time I looked at you, I saw my sister. I saw the life we could have. I saw love that doesn't need power to exist." Grace cupped his face. "Love doesn't care about skin color. It doesn't care about bank accounts. It only cares that two people choose each other again and again through every storm. Ethan kissed her palm. I choose you every day, every hour. Behind them, their son pressed his nose to the window, watching the children play. Can we get flowers for Mama? He asked. Ethan smiled. All the flowers she wants. They crossed the street together. Grace bought a simple bouquet of daisies, the same kind she had planted at home. The shop owner recognized her face from the news, but said nothing, only smiled and added extra stems for free. As they walked back to the car, Grace paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the sky. For the first time in years, she breathed without fear. That night, after their son was asleep, Grace and Ethan sat on the terrace overlooking the lake. Stars reflected on the water like scattered diamonds. She rested her head on his shoulder. I used to think love was something that happened to other people, she said softly. People with money, people with safety. I never thought it could happen to someone like me. Ethan turned, cupping her face. Love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't check your bank balance or your last name. It just arrives, and if you're lucky, it stays. She smiled through tears. I'm lucky. He kissed her then, slow, deep, full of every promise they had kept and every one they still meant to keep. When they parted, he whispered against her lips, I love you more than I knew I could love anyone. And I love you, she answered, regardless of everything the world tried to make us believe. In the quiet that followed, Grace spoke again, voice thoughtful. There are so many lessons here. Knowledge matters, knowledge of what really matters, knowledge of mercy, knowledge of forgiveness, knowledge of love that sees past every wall. This story carries a lesson about compassion, a lesson about second chances, a lesson about breaking cycles, a lesson about choosing kindness, a lesson about healing. Education of the heart is the only education that truly lasts. Education through pain teaches us what joy costs. Education through love teaches us we are worthy. Ethan listened, eyes shining. And the greatest education is knowing someone can change, even when the world says they can't. Grace leaned into him. We changed each other. They sat in silence a long while, wrapped in each other, watching the lake shimmer. If you've stayed with this story until the end, thank you. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. Please subscribe to the channel Alex Truths, like this video, and share it so others can find these stories of hope and redemption. How did this story make you feel? Does it connect to anything in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and I want to hear the emotions deep in your hearts. Goodbye for now, and I promise to see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.